Right, I'm done with the silence.
But is the silence done with you?
The silence is never done with me, Ryan. I'm there to fill it. That's my
podcast,
soul.
Our podcast tagline is there to fill your silence.
Just the gaping silence within us all.
Yeah, and we had that as a Spotify ad, or a idea for a Spotify ad is don't let the bad thoughts come in. Listen to the Comic Lyra podcast.
Cue the music.
Cue the music. Hello and welcome back to the Comic Lyra podcast. The podcast. I'm leaving it in.
No, we can't. We're a professional podcast.
The podcast where I, Ryan, also soon to be known as Comic Stan, get my real book nerd of a bloke co-host, get him to read comics, make him read comics in another way of saying it, and make him talk them through, talk about them, the good, the bad, the middest.
I feel as though we should have gotten the Bibliostan to write the intro.
And you are the Bibliostan.
Exactly.
Well, write an intro then.
Oh, yeah, fine, I'll do it. Next week, guys.
And with me, as always, is my aforementioned mouthy co-host, it's Jamie. And I had that written down before you cut.
Did you actually?
Yes.
I am mouthy.
I didn't know if you'd go positive or negative on that, because I was prepared to explain it away by being like, well, it's Merc with a mouth month, and I called you a mercenary last episode, so had to go with the other verb in the description. I don't know. What the words mean?
I am mouthy.
You are mouthy. And that's why you're my co-host.
I'm letting the incorrect classification of a word slip past me there because it's warm.
But you are digging your fingernails into the chair. Like,
yeah, absolutely. I'm very uncomfortable.
You're jonesing to correct me.
But I'm not going to. I'm going to be nice today. So this is the second episode in Merc with a Mouth month.
Second week, baby. Merc with a Mouth month, baby.
I like this one.
It's a good one. It's a good one. It's another one from my past. Again, my introduction into comics properly was basically just blitzing the entire Deadpool back catalogue, because back then, as I said last week, I mistakenly thought that that's how you read comics. You like a character and you read everything that's ever been written about them ever. Thank God I didn't get into Batman or Superman, because I would still be reading them now.
You would still be somewhere in the mid-1950s.
But this was a particular favourite of mine. So Cable and Deadpool, specifically, the buddy team-up series, which I actually have here, was voted by people to be, and I'm slowly stalling while I bring it up again.
Which people?
It was voted by Marvel.com's list. So take that with a pinch of salt. But
this is why I always check my sources, Ryan.
It was ranked number 7 of the 10 greatest buddy teams of all time. So
that's not really a glowing review, is it?
No, I mean, it's better than better than whoever 8, 9, and 10 was. So
oh, clearly.
Sucks to be you guys. But yes, this one was an interesting one. It was a notable one from when I read it, and it's introduced me to the character of Cable, which I think it has done for you as well.
Yeah, I didn't have a scoop. I still don't have a scoop who he is.
Well, we'll get into that then. But also, it's from 2004, so we lasted 97, the first ongoing series of Deadpool. We are literally going kind of decade to decade.
So we've gone from pre-Toy Story to post-Toy Story now.
Yeah, BTS is the nomenclature for that.
Anno Buzz Lightyear eye.
Yeah, sure. Because the Toy Story series started with Buzz Lightyear within the universe, didn't it?
It did, yeah.
So that's accurate.
Yeah, I know. I knew what I was doing, Ryan.
So going, 7 years later.
Did you have to do the maths?
Yeah, but I'm on the spot. So 7 years later.
Ryan, it's arithmetic.
Don't you judge me for lack of arithmetic.
We went to the same shit school, I'm aware, but even so.
Anyway. 7 years later, Deadpool character, he's a bit more established, still not in the zeitgeist yet. I think he was still kind of underknown at this point, evidenced by the fact that the reason Cable and Deadpool here are kind of brought together is they weren't doing much else with them at the time.
Right.
It was a bit of a case of like, well, these guys are similar, and, you know, we've just cancelled both of their individual series that were going. Let's just pop them together and see what happens. And turned out a bit of a lasting connection in the fact that Deadpool 2, the film, had Cable as a big character in that, based on the lasting impression of this comic and team-up. So
I'm going to be honest with you. I'm not 100% sure I've seen Deadpool 2.
Oh, well, if you didn't know Cable, you definitely haven't.
Yeah, clearly.
So that we're going to have to watch that at some point. before we go to see Deadpool 3.
I will ingest it, don't
Yes.
worry.
So, yes, Cable and Deadpool 2004 ran for about 50 issues, so just over 4 years. So, pretty in there. I realized last week, don't ask me about time. I realized last week that I did a basic Deadpool history in terms of like publication history, like how he's created and stuff. And I'll do that for Cable as well. But I realized we didn't actually do a origin kind of story for Deadpool, in case anyone who's listening might know the character, but might not know where they started from. So, putting you on the spot, do you want to attempt to tell the people the Deadpool character, his origin, and what his kind of deal is?
Yes, I do, because I know this.
All right. That's why I thought I'd give you the shot.
So Wade Wilson was a happy-go-lucky alcoholic.
I don't know if the alcohol's canon, but he was a guy.
Oh, I thought his whole thing was that he loved getting drunk, and then as Deadpool, he couldn't get drunk anymore because of his healing factor, and so he started like drinking bleach and shit to try and get drunk.
That might be a factor. Like, I don't remember that, but I don't think it was like a staple of his character.
So Wade Wilson was a happy-go-lucky, mouthy guy.
Yes.
And he got some pretty untreatable cancer.
Yep.
And in the course of trying to get that cancer treated, he ended up in the hands of Project X.
Yes.
Who did fucked up shit to him and gave him Wolverine's healing factor.
Yeah.
And super strength.
Just the healing factor.
Just the healing factor.
Yeah. I mean, everyone's super strong in the Marvel universe.
Yeah.
You know, like that.
And then he ended up breaking out of Project X and he became a mercenary using his skills.
Weapon X.
Weapon X.
Yeah, that's important.
So he broke out. So look, right, if you're going to make me do this, you can't interrupt me. These are the rules.
I don't think I was.
I will turn your microphone off.
I don't know if you have that power.
I'm coming in real spicy today.
As opposed to...
Normally when I'm lovely and placid and very kind.
You're coming in with the energy, and I like that.
Yeah, I'm bringing the energy, man.
Yes.
I'm bringing that Merc with a mouth energy.
Yep, that is...
To this recording. Anyway, he breaks out of Weapon X.
He does.
And then he becomes a mercenary using his skills. He also has bobbly skin and a lady a blind lady who he lives with.
Yep.
And he likes guns and swords.
Yeah, pretty much. He was a mercenary, I think, before the whole thing happened.
But,
but then he obviously became Deadpool the mercenary afterwards. So,
yes.
yeah, a bit of a difference. But
do you reckon anyone put two and two together? They're like, we've not seen Wade around recently. But
it's not like a secret identity kind of thing, I don't think. I don't know why he calls himself Deadpool in the sense that because every character is like that in the Marvel universe.
And then in the film, they explain it that in Weapon X, there was a Deadpool that they all had as to who was going to die next. And obviously he won the Deadpool, essentially. And that's where the name comes from. I don't know if that's canon, though.
It is canon in his origin. The only difference is the Deadpool was when in the Weapon X place. What they were calling it?
Literally what I just said.
No, sorry. I thought you said in the film, it was in the mercenary place.
Right, okay,
yeah.
sorry.
So in the mercenary place, they were like, which guy is going to get like killed on a job next? In his origin, what they call it, the warehouse or something in the last one? The workshop, yeah. In that, they were just experimenting on people, and they were like, I wonder who's going to die from the experiments we're doing next. And they literally had where they were betting on them.
They had a Deadpool.
Yes. Now, added thing with the whole Deadpool thing, because I personally like this aspect, and it's an underrepresented aspect in the whole Deadpool mythos. While he was being experimented on, he wanted to die, not only because he was being experimented on, but because he was so close to death that he actually met and began kind of a relationship with the embodiment of death.
Right, cool.
The actual, like, being of death that represents death in the Marvel Universe. And the thing is, because he was still kind of mouthy and stuff like, and funny and whatever, he kind of charmed to death to the point where he was so close to death and he wanted to die. And that's kind of what happened with the Deadpool, because they were like, I wonder if he's going to bite you because he wants to die. And the tragedy of the character is just when he's about to die, when he's close to die, literally some guy rips his heart out,
right,
like while he's strapped to a table. And he's just like, yes, finally I'm out of here. And death is like, I can't wait to be with you. Like, you're almost there. That's when the healing factor kicks in. And that's kind of the tragedy. He's like, the guy who wants to die, not only because he's kind of depressed as a character.
He now can't die.
Exactly. But he can't be with the being that he loves, which is death, the mistress death. And they kind of did that in Deadpool 2 with, I mean, you'll see it when you see it. But what's also funny is death is also the motivator for the character Thanos in the comics.
Yeah.
Thanos wants to kill people because he literally is in love with the being of death as well. And there's a little...
Is she just really hot?
Not, she's like a skeleton. So I think it's more like the concept. She's got great personality, I guess.
Sexy skeleton.
Yeah, but we don't want to encourage anorexia or anything on this podcast.
No,
you know?
it's not the 90s anymore.
Exactly. It was last week. Now it's not. Now it's the noughties.
Now it's the noughties. So what? I mean, the noughties still had like, you know, Tumblr inspiration and shit. Like diet culture was still pretty toxic in the noughties. Oh
yeah, but not as bad as I think it wasn't acknowledged in the 90s, you know? It was just like thin people are attractive. Like that was the 90s.
The 90s was grim.
Yes.
Like the idea that Renee Zellweger was fat.
Yeah, that's insane.
Like Bridget Jones' Diary, Renee Zellweger was seen as being like really fat and unaccomplished. And it's fucking Renee Zellweger, firstly, massively attractive woman, particularly then, who had a really great job in journalism. And it's like, what the fuck, guys?
Yeah, yeah. And whereas nowadays we're reading comics with like actually realistically proportioned people who
occasionally.
I think we're seeing it more than we've ever seen it before.
Women are still pretty poorly represented in the medium.
I mean, superheroes generally always like overly muscular and thin and stuff. And at this point, it's a win if the female superhero's costume isn't revealing way more skin than the men's. Like that's a win these days still. But so yeah, Lady Death, they had a limited series, Deadpool and Thanos, where they were like both vying for Death's affection kind of thing.
That's really cool.
Thanos is kind of like, I know she likes you more, but you're a fucking clown, so I'm not going to stand for this. And Deadpool's like, all right, calm down. Like, it's a good kind of dynamic.
Yeah, because they're biometrically opposed as characters, aren't they?
Yeah, and that's what makes it so interesting. It's like, before they kind of addressed it properly, it was one of those tidbits of like, both the characters who are both in love with death, the character of death in the Marvel Universe, are Thanos, and you're like, yeah, that makes sense. And Deadpool's like, wait, what?
What's Wade doing?
Okay. But Death definitely prefers Deadpool over Thanos. I think she finds Thanos boring, you know?
Yeah, and I like, of all the characters that we've talked about, I think the two that I would like to like get a beer with are Wade Wilson and Dick Grayson.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Dick Grayson, you'd be looked through by everyone else in the room. Like,
yeah, but the thing is, if you're going out with Dick Grayson, you don't need to like do any kind of grooming for that meet-up, because you know it doesn't matter anyway, does it?
There's no point trying to present yourself in anything other
than... Yeah, you can just turn up in sweats and get shit-faced.
Whereas compared to Deadpool, if he's at the point where he's okay with how he looks, you just stand next to a guy with like open sores on his face, and you're like, I look pretty good by comparison.
Yeah, so then you don't need to do any grooming.
Exactly. So it's a win-win. That's the best dialogue, the best logical choices of like, who would you rather hang out with from the superhero universes?
The ones that help me get
Who do I not have to brush my hair or take a shower for? You could probably throw Swamp Thing in there for that as well.
Yeah, he's quite serious though, isn't he?
Yeah, he's an Alan Moore. He's not an Alan Moore original character. He's like,
but he's a swamp. He's a thing from the swamp.
Yeah, Alan Moore enjoyed writing him, so that tells you what we need to know about.
Hey, we got Alan Moore in. He's not been in for a while.
He will be mentioned at the end. We've got a comment related to it. Cool. So, Cable, you have just met this kind of first time.
Yeah, I don't like him.
Yeah, and I think there's a point to that. One of the reasons I think I like the dynamic between Deadpool and Cable, and this is kind of a bit of my own headcanon, but like, you know, when you stuff you add yourself that you like or that makes you likable. I think the reason Deadpool and Cable are such a good team up is because they're both disliked by everyone else around them.
Yes.
Deadpool because he's annoying, like that's just how the character's presented, and Cable, I think he comes off as like because his thing is he's from the future.
Yeah.
And he's constantly banging on about like, oh, well, if we don't change this, then the future's going to suck. And everyone's like, we know, Cable. Like, yes, please stop banging. It's like, your friend who's like keeps banging on about the environment. It's like, yeah, you're right, but you're just a downer now. Like, there's nothing we can do. It's going to end. The world's going to end. Just please stop talking about it so I can just finish watching Gladiators or whatever. Like,
Gladiators? Is that what you're doing in your spare time?
Not me personally, but I'm speaking for the common man. Because I don't sound like the common man, obviously. So, yeah, I think that everyone's like, all right, Cable, we know, just calm down. And I think they are different in themselves, but they're an odd couple, naturally. But I think they are joined as kind of like no one else really wants to hang out with them. So they have that in common.
Yeah.
So Cable as a character, he was created by Chris Claremont, but as a baby. So that comes into the whole origin, which I'll badly explain later as well. But basically, he was kind of created by a Louise Simonson, and you'll guess it, Rob Liefeld.
Hey.
And the reason you know it's Rob Liefeld is if it's a character who's overly muscular, carries big weapons, and has satchels all over their body, that's a Rob Liefeld character.
It's probably Rob Liefeld.
That's Deadpool, that's Cable, and they did it with other people as well, but
So I watched,
you get the point.
for some reason, I don't know if Google knows that I make this podcast. YouTube has been really keen to serve me quite a lot of Rob Liefeld content recently.
You've Googled that one bad picture he did, the Captain America drawing he did, and now it's like, oh, you love Rob Liefeld. It's like, no one loves Rob Liefeld. That's the problem.
I don't think the only person who loves Rob Liefeld
is Rob Liefeld.
Yeah, absolutely, and that's a really unfortunate trait.
He's kind of the Rob Schneider of the comic book. That was harsh. I'm sorry, Rob Liefeld. I did not mean to compare. I did not mean it to compare you to Rob Schneider. No one deserves that. Like, sorry, Liefeld. You contribute to some characters I really enjoy, so I don't want to diss you in that way. So, Cable, big Santos and everything, introduced the new mutants along kind of side Deadpool era. That's probably why they're put them together now, because they're in that similar era of X-Men adjacent stuff.
Yeah.
So the thing about, and also introduced like 1990. So again, almost the same year as Deadpool, so very similar in that regard. The origin story of Cable is fucking ridiculous. And I don't mean even like that's a derogatory, I just like objectively it's crazy, right?
Right, okay.
So, Cable, what happened was, you know Cyclops and Jean Grey, right?
Yep.
So they are X-Men, and at one point Jean Grey is pregnant and they have a child. Side note, it's not actually Jean Grey, it's her clone who Mr. Sinister created called Madeline Pryor, but that happens later, but it's not Jean Grey. So they have a kid. Turns out Sinister made the clone of Jean Grey to basically get a kid, a genetic child from a Jean Grey and a Scott Summers, because there's some kind of future prophecy or something that this kid is going to be the one who kills Apocalypse.
Right.
And Sinister's working for Apocalypse.
Okay.
So Apocalypse, or through Sinister somehow, gets a techno-organic virus on the kid to be like, this is going to kill the kid. So as it's killing the kid, they, through I think the character Bishop, who you remember, you laughed at his name because he's from the future as well. They were like, hey, our kid's going to die from something that we don't like, that doesn't exist yet. So we have no way of fighting it. Can you take him to the can you take us to the future to help him cure it? And he's like, I can literally only take like me and one other person for super shenanigan reasons.
For plot reasons.
Yes, exactly. So they're like, all right, he's going to die
take
otherwise.
Our kid.
Well, he's going to die otherwise. So
he's dead anyway.
Exactly. So kid, take him to the future. They don't know what's happened to him. And then months or years later, however long, this character Cable appears and it's, by the way, I'm your son. And they're like, what? He's Nathan Summers. But the Cable name is from the future.
Yeah.
So he's a Omega level mutant in terms of telepathy. And this is a cool thing I like about the character. He's strong, telekinetic, psychic, and all that.
Yeah.
But because of the organic virus, he never actually got that cured. They delayed it. What he does is he has to constantly put that, he has to hold the virus at bay with his telekinesis.
That's explained in the comic book.
Yeah, for the listener.
About 5 times.
Yes.
They really laboured that point.
Yeah, and it's a big plot point in the comic, so that makes sense. But I just like the fact that I like the idea of a character who would be more powerful is if it wasn't for this, like, almost like a handicap to their insane powers, if that makes sense. So, and then ultimately that kind of leaves him, most of the time he's like just a normal guy with guns and stuff.
Yeah.
In this, the big plot is, part of it is he's developed his psychic powers more so he can hold back the virus while still kind of doing normal stuff. So yeah, that is the character Cable. So we've covered those points, and obviously we've got to get the credits in for the comic that we are about to go into.
So much admin these days.
I mean,
oh my god,
I'm explaining characters, so I could have asked you to explain the Cable character.
That would have been way more fun.
I mean, it would have been all over the place for sure. I mean, now
no,
of course it would have been.
No, I would have made a compelling story. I would have made a more compelling story than that.
All right, go ahead then.
No,
exactly.
All
mouth. That was appropriate.
All mouth.
And now you get
it's a fucking podcast.
We have to be all mouth. It's part of the contract. So now I have to attempt to pronounce the writer's surname, which I listened to a thing earlier to try and get down, and now I've lost again. So now I'm going to play the thing again and then cut the thing out. So
why
it sounds
don't you just play it into the mic?
I'm not going to play it into the mic. I'll play it so I can hear and I'll say it properly. I'll do them the service at least.
Right, okay.
As opposed to a disservice by not doing it. And is written by Fabian Nicieza. That's correct.
That's not what he said.
Yes, it is.
The listener will never know.
I mean, Google the name. And also, interestingly, he is also a co-creator of Deadpool. He got some of the credit from Rob Liefeld, who was like, yeah, I guess.
The bit of credit he left over.
Yeah, the name. He gave the name Wade Wilson. She was like, that's Deathstroke. And Rob's like, no. So I was like, I'm going to call him Wade Wilson. Just to fuck it. And artist Mark Brooks. And interestingly, lettering, I was going to credit it. And it just had what I thought was a surname, which was Udon.
I didn't like the lettering.
Well, so here's the thing. I was like, an interesting surname, Udon. Like, I know it's a noodle. I've never heard as a surname. Turned out Udon Comics was the credit. So they've obviously outsourced the lettering to a company and just credited the company. So that might be why you didn't like it. Maybe it was lettering by committee or something like that.
So most of it was fine. But yeah, we'll get into that when we talk about the art.
I mean, I've just given the credit, so shall we get to the point where we do the theme tune?
Oh, I don't want to do the theme song today.
But we do it every single episode.
No, but we didn't, Ryan. You've been gaslighting the audience for about a month.
Who started that bit?
You
did.
No, you did.
Right, listeners, go back in the episodes and find the first mention of we do it every episode, because I'm almost certain it was you.
No, Ryan's gaslighting you, and now he's gaslighting me.
I feel like it's a you thing to be like, to throw that kind of that bit into it, you know?
I don't know that it is. I don't want to take credit for this.
And I don't know why we're talking anyway, because we do it all every episode anyway, so...
So we're starting with the arting, and we're going to talk about art. It's fine.
I had the same kind of reaction to it. I was more interested in it of like, oh, this is what the Marvel house style was like in the early noughties.
Yeah,
like,
absolutely.
That was the more fascination.
So, in comparison with the way that Deadpool was drawn in 97, they've definitely slimmed him down a bit. He's not as over-muscled.
And I think that was unique to the 97 like style. Like, again, Liefeld-esque. You know? This
is much more in line with what I would expect from Deadpool now. There was some
very bright, like very high, like contrasting colors.
Well, it's the mid-noughties Marvel house style, isn't it?
Yes,
very much so.
I honestly, I don't know if I've read much from the noughties or not.
Well, I imagine you've read a lot from the noughties because you were consuming comic books.
Yeah, but as in I can't like sort in my head what was noughties and what wasn't, you know? Like, I didn't know this was from the noughties. I just knew I read it, you know?
We've read some stuff from the noughties, though, haven't we? Together.
The biggest thing from this time, and I know it ties in with this comic, is Civil War.
Yeah, which we've both read.
Yes. And the reason I know that is because in this comic, the tie-in happens, and I've said before, it's one of the few tie-ins that's not the entire world is going to explode.
Yeah.
That makes sense that everyone's involved. The Superhero Registration Act means every superhero has to have an opinion on it.
And isn't Wade well up for it?
Yes, exactly. Yeah. And do you remember his argument? Because I think I've told you before, but do you remember his reasoning? He was like, I'm a fucking lunatic with weapons. I should not be allowed to do what I do. That's why they need this law. He's like, I won't follow it. Like, I'm a maniac. Like, I'm not going to follow it, but they should have the law. Like, it makes sense for them to have it.
I like that logic.
And Cable's thing, kind of playing into his character, he's like, I've seen where this goes. Like, it's the Super Registration Act now, then it's the Mutant Registration Act further down the line, and then it's Sentinels and, like, concentration camps for mutants. And, like, again, why he's such a bored, like a...
Because we see all that stuff in that X-Men comic we read, didn't we, where they go to the future.
And that's not even like Cable's main thing. Cable's main thing is the apocalypse taking over. But he's just also seen the timelines of this stuff happening as well. So, because that Days of Future Past stuff is more Bishop. Like, yeah. But yeah, no, it's exactly right.
So in terms of the way this is drawn, there's no real big splash panels, which I think I would like because Deadpool's quite action heavy at times. And so just seeing him in great poses with like a hand on one bad guy and a sword in the other is quite fun.
Yeah.
We don't get a lot of that, but it's good. It looks good. I thought it looked really nice. And I definitely feel as though, comparing it to 97, this was a really nice evolution of the character. And so the way, just little things, like the way that Wade's skin was presented was just
more sore looking.
Yeah, it definitely looked more refined. It looked more refined and more easy to read. It was more easy to read what was going on here than it was in the 97 one.
Yes.
I really liked the way that, right at the end of the story where everyone's melting. I like the way that all that was presented.
Oh, and also we're going full in first 6 issues. We're going full into it.
Dude, it's a 20-year-old comic. It doesn't matter, does it?
Like people literally complain about spoiler things like on the internet constantly. So I'm always
do they complain about it in our comment section though?
Not yet.
Well, let's see if we can get that traffic.
There's some kind of like law of thermodynamics or something. It's like if you're on the internet talking about any kind of content for long enough time, X amount of time till you eventually have people complaining you've spoiled something, even as benign as like the Sixth Sense or some bollocks. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like it's one of those things.
But no, I like the way it was drawn. I
Yes.
like the way it was drawn. The lettering.
I did not. Oh, I did notice one specific thing, but I'll let you. I think you're going to say it.
So the blue people.
Yes.
Their leader, the way that his text is lettered,
Yes.
renders it almost unreadable.
It's not him specifically. It's something they all do, but it's
Yeah.
when they do like a unified kind of a hive mind.
Something for one, something for all kind of thing. That stuff is lettered in a bespoke font that I've never seen before, and it's really fine and really faint and has lots of like strong ascenders and descenders. Well, yeah, it's kind of, but it's not cursive because the letters aren't joined up. So it has the features of cursive. It has like loopy, quite ornamented. That's what the term you use for in script and calligraphy is. They're quite ornamented characters.
Right.
So, you know, the characters have ornamentation.
Characters
on them.
in letters, not characters in story characters.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah.
Yes.
So they're quite heavily ornamented characters.
I know things.
But it's unreadable for me. And again, Ryan knows me. The listeners probably won't know this. I'm really into calligraphy. That's one of my hobbies, is that I have pretty handwriting that I've trained my hand over years and years and years.
And yet he still doesn't take notes when he reads comics.
No, I don't.
He can make notes in calligraphy, like Deadpool is funny, but just looks really nice.
Do you reckon if I did start making notes in my overly pretty handwriting, we could sell them to people on Patreon?
It wouldn't appeal to me personally, but maybe there's a market for it.
If you would like for Ryan to finally get what he's always wanted, which is for me to make actual notes, and then we will like sign my notes and send them to Patreon listeners, would you subscribe for that?
And if you subscribe to it, then you are making him make notes, and that's the added bonus.
Yeah, so let us know in the comments section.
Yes.
Would you do it?
So in terms of the font, I feel like I did read it. I don't think I had difficulty. I
could read it.
Yeah.
But it just wasn't very legible.
Yes.
That's the thing.
And I think for me that worked in that was more of a feeding into the contextual reason for the font change than any I've seen before. I feel like it was such a weird font. I was like, oh yeah, they are saying really weird shit in that moment.
No, I get it. I do understand it on a creative level.
Yeah.
And as a
I'm
storytelling
saying I liked it because it did that.
Yeah, but the font itself was hot garbage.
Yeah, you could make an argument for you could choose a different font which would achieve the same results contextually but would be more legible.
Yeah.
Like you could argue that.
The other thing that they did quite well in this is that at some point Wade Wilson really buys into that cult and allows them to turn him blue. And so he looks nondescript from the other characters, but of course all of his speech bubbles are still yellow.
Yes.
And that was I thought that was a really, really nice way of them showing their protagonist, their main character, that they need to look distinct, showing him essentially merge with this like weird hive-mindy cult, but also still allowing him to look distinct. And it's something that is just baked into his character anyway. Deadpool's speech bubbles are always yellow.
Yeah, and I mentioned it last week. Maybe you didn't. If you didn't hear it last week for whatever reason, there's a weird thing right now where the reason bubbles normally have color is to denote some kind of different sound in their speech, right? So like Iron Man, when he's in his armor, would have a different color speech bubble because it's like a robotic voice coming through his armor.
Doesn't he?
Yeah, and like people do it different ways, but there's always something to denote that. With Deadpool, now that we've had the films, like including X-Men, starting with X-Men Origins, and then obviously with the Deadpool films as well, he just sounds like Ryan Reynolds. But apparently, the reason he had the yellow boxes in the first place was because of the cancer-ridden body.
His voice
box was meant to be really raspy and cancer-ridden as well. So I think it was that juxtaposition of him sounding like a person with a needs a voice box, but just talk constantly quipping and saying bollocks. So now it's a thing where most people agree he sounds like Ryan Reynolds.
Yeah.
But no one's changed the thing in the comics because, again, as you say, it identifies him really easily and no one questions it.
I like it.
Yeah, no, exactly. So it's one of those unique kind of things of like, oh, it happened because of this, but that no longer applies, but it still happens.
Yeah.
Like, it's a unique point like that. Maybe I'll make a video about it. How does Deadpool sound? I'll make a note of that. Put that in the old the notes. No one steal that idea, please.
Everyone make it. I want to go on YouTube tomorrow and find 20 videos about why Deadpool's voice speech bubbles are yellow.
I mean, that's a good like thumbnail. It's like, why are Deadpool's speech bubbles yellow?
Get out of video mode. Start thinking about the podcast, mate.
Hang on, let me video mode for 2 more seconds.
He's literally making notes, guys.
There we go. This is how often I make notes. I make notes all day. So, yes, art-wise, I think we've kind of covered the bases. I tell you what, again, it was quite bright and contrasting. There was a lot of detail to background stuff, which I appreciate.
Yes.
We've read a lot of comics where around this time or earlier, where backgrounds are quite blank.
Yeah.
Because it's just less work. I feel like in this, there was constantly people in the background and little attention to detail. There was one art, I'll say it in the arting because it was like a joke in the art. There's a point where Cable has a massive fucking gun, which is, he's kind of gone through this without guns because his telekinesis is more his thing recently. When he picks up the gun, it's kind of an homage to like the original Cable because he would always have these massive guns. And on the gun, which he's pulled out ridiculously big, like Looney Tunes style big almost, it says like a model, like a make model kind of on the gun. It says Liefeld XS.
Yeah.
And I just love that. It's like, because that's the Liefeld thing, like massive fucking guns. There's also a joke in the Deadpool Wolverine trailer where they're walking past a shop and the shop is called Liefeld Feet.
Right.
And it's because apparently Liefeld was really bad at drawing feet.
He was.
Exactly. So he's still getting the mentions and he bloody loves it. But good on you, Liefeld. You've earned it, I guess.
So the story. The comic book itself. The first thing that I noticed about Deadpool here, because in the 97 version, he wasn't that quippy yet.
I made a note about this, and my support. I don't know if it's quippiness, and I more addressed it from this, or is it more just stream of consciousness? Like, he's not quipping to make jokes. He's literally just saying what he's thinking.
Yeah,
at all
so
times.
we have the more frenetic Deadpool at this point. By this point in the evolution of the character, we've reached the point where Deadpool is kind of... He's now what I think of Deadpool as being, which is that more frenetic, constantly running off at the mouth character. He was a little bit more reserved in 97, wasn't he?
I don't know. I feel like he was... I mean, those first 2 issues, he was very quippy. And as we said last week, that when the shit got real with his backstory, that's when he got less quippy.
Whereas now he's still cracking jokes the whole way through.
But I think this is less sensitive to him personally. Like, there's elements. I'd say if you look at a percentage of like quippiness to also, what would you call it, realness? Like, that's a shit. Like, he's real. He's a realist.
Stoicism.
Yeah, or just this like serious kind of like sustenance, like real substantive stuff. Substantive stuff. Trying to think of a good word for it. Like, I don't know, real character stuff, character development, whatever it is. The percentage was like quite high character stuff. And obviously, past the first 2 issues, lower quippiness in 97. I think we're a bit more of a 50-50 balance here.
Okay.
So he's quipping all the way through.
Yeah.
And there's not as deep a backstory related like crisis like in 97 that we read. But in this one, there's a bit like, he still has a bit of a personal relation to the whatever's going on. Like, as you said, he becomes blue.
He does get blued up.
And that relates to him not liking how he looks.
Yes.
And while there's this whole ploy of like, he's like, well, if everyone looked the same, then there'd be less crime kind of thing. It's like, well, people are going to hate each other no matter what. Like, tribalism is always going to exist. But I think that's just like a cover thing for him to say. That's an excuse because really it's just because he doesn't want to be judged how he looks.
Yes, totally.
Yeah. So, yeah, it changed in that. And then as we will read, modern Deadpool is just all quips, no substance. And that's my issue with modern Deadpool, which will be another video probably at some point. So, yeah, quippiness-wise.
The actual story itself is pretty solid. Like, I enjoyed it.
Yeah.
There was some moments where if I'm being completely honest, I didn't fully understand everyone's character motivations.
Yes, so I felt that going through. I was kind of like, wait, why has this happened? Like, there's a part where there's so do you want to give a brief? Do you want to attempt to give a kind of brief story overview?
Yeah, okay.
It might. I will give you this. This is a bit more of a difficult one. It's a bit more all over the place.
Well, it is. Yeah, and in terms of plot, it is fucking all over the place.
Yes.
So Wade has been sent by these blue people. He's been paid by these blue people.
The Blue Man Group.
The Blue Man Group.
Yeah.
To retrieve a virus that's being created.
Yes.
That basically turns people to mush, right?
I think it affects how people look. And I think the desired outcome is it changes how everyone looks who gets the virus. But the side effect that they're trying to get rid of is they eventually people melt.
But was he commissioned by the blue people, or was he commissioned to go steal it from them?
No,
he was commissioned by them to go steal it from like a lab or something.
From like a big pharma research place.
And then Cable has been commissioned to destroy it entirely.
He is just doing that himself, isn't he? Like that's he's tracking this thing. He's like, this virus is going to be a big problem in the future,
and he's
always banging on about the future.
Yeah, and then they get to it. Basically, Wade is able to get it.
Yes,
in a Mountain Dew bowl.
Yep, that's all he had.
And then he takes it to the blue people. They blew him up. There's some.
You've seen Arrested Development.
Yeah,
I seem to have blew myself. All right, that's enough. That's enough about thinking something that's funnier than what we're currently presenting to the world. Don't go and watch Arrested Development. Please keep listening.
But once you're finished, like I'd highly recommend it.
Yes, it's amazing.
Yeah, it's great. It's like British humor in American television. It's fantastic.
Yes, cerebral humor.
It's really good.
Someone described it well. It's a story. It's a show about dumb people written by smart people.
Yes,
which is the exact opposite of the
Big Bang Theory.
There you go.
But yeah, so Cable then turns up. They fight. They buddy up. They go to this other place.
I don't think they quite buddy. They buddy up for a very small amount of time, don't they?
Yeah, and then there's a bunch of shenanigans, and Deadpool ends up essentially where he started, but Cable has his healing factor now.
Yes, so as you said, Deadpool has the thing that turns blue, but it also does eventually turn everyone to mush.
Yeah,
he turns to mush, and I tell you what I did like. There's a lot of times where they use repeating panels for comedic effect.
Yeah.
Once right at the beginning, where Deadpool's literally just watching TV and shouting at the television.
Or for hours.
Yes. For literally days passing.
Yeah.
And then they do it where he's melted next to a Cable who, because of the virus, has lost his telekinesis and his technovirus has taken over. So that's what would happen. That's what would have happened to him as a baby if he wasn't sent to the future. He would have just become like a solid metal robot that doesn't do anything. But because Deadpool manages to he tries to reach Cable, and then Cable, his last little bit of telekinesis, and he gets
throws up on
gets
him.
Gets that little bit of Deadpool. No, he absorbs Deadpool, doesn't he? So he uses his telekinesis to get like that one drop of Deadpool over to him, and that's enough for Deadpool's healing factor to cure Cable's techno-organic virus.
Yeah.
And then he vomits a Deadpool who reforms in front of him. So very superhero shenanigans.
Yeah.
But again, they use the repeating panels, I should say, because it takes Deadpool ages to get over to him.
Yeah.
At one point, he's like, "Well, I've lost my legs, but I'll crawl over with my arms," and then he loses his hand.
I love the point where he's like, once it gets the larynx, this narration stops.
Yes.
Like, you once you lose my larynx, you lose basically what is most entertaining about me.
And says something about Deadpool. For all injuries he can sustain and still be quippy because he's got the healing factor, he is literally melting, for all he knows, to death. And he's still given the quips. And I think you got to respect that. Like,
I really like this iteration of Deadpool.
They're hitting my perfect level is what we're going to do next week, which is 2013.
Yeah.
So they're getting closer to where I think the peak was. And then obviously they go too far afterwards. But yeah, this is very close.
Yeah, it's good.
Yeah, and why I enjoyed it.
So, I mean, again, even though we have Deadpool's constant... I don't like using diegetic and non-diegetic in terms of comic books because it's all on a page. But we have Deadpool's constant diegetic narration, but we don't have any of those sort of what would in a film be non-diegetic.
Either inner monologue or third-person narration.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. In square speech bubbles in the corner of every panel.
Yes.
Which means that the story unfolds quite organically. And Deadpool is sufficiently funny throughout. Cable is a really...
He's like straight man in a double act.
Yeah, this is it. I don't particularly like the way he's characterized. I don't particularly like what they've done with the character, but he's the perfect serious foil to Deadpool's comedy.
Yes. And especially someone who's so serious all the time, to the point where everyone else is like, oh, bloody Cable. Like,
yeah, and there's a sense that wherever they end up together, everyone's like, fucking these guys.
Yes.
Like, what the fuck are these guys doing here?
Yeah, like no one wants to hang out with either.
Yeah, exactly.
For very different reasons. I do like... I like the Deadpool's you see him, he's in New York, and originally I was immediately going to be like, another New York-based superhero.
Yeah.
But I don't think he operates in New York. Like, he's one of the smart ones. He's got his home in New York, and then he operates the rest of the world. Like, he's not bringing that shit home with him.
But because I had this thought when he had to get on a commercial flight to Singapore in this one.
Yes.
And he's just sat there and he keeps asking that guy if he's going to finish all his food. And he's just being really annoying on the flight. Like, a superhero without the backing of like a Tony Stark bankrolling them or the Avengers, S.H.I.E.L.D. or somebody bankrolling them is a really ineffective thing.
Yeah.
Because like you're having to get commercial flights to places and nobody's paying you.
I mean, he's going to get money for the job, but it's one of those like he's going to be the expenses of his job when he's going to file the expenses later. Like, it's funny you say that because I actually just today, read a Captain America comic.
Yeah.
First of a new series started late last year. But in that, the building he lives in Brooklyn, I think, is getting like closed or decommissioned because of damage to it. So he realizes that it's for sale. So he goes to Tony and is like, hey, can I have a forward on my Avengers salary? And Tony's like, yeah, you can have whatever you want. Like,
your cap.
Yeah, we've got loads of money. It's like, what are you finally getting that jet I told you to get or whatever? And he's like, no, I'm actually gonna go into real estate. And he's like, Tony's like, oh, cool, like skyscraper, like shopping mall, like what you doing? And he's like, nah, just like a 10 flat building in Brooklyn or whatever, and it's the story initially is literally him becoming the landlord for the apartment that his parents had in the like 30s and 40s, like that kind of stuff. So yeah, very, very promising new Captain America story, which I'm
that's really cool.
Yeah,
Steve Rogers is so wholesome.
Exactly. Maybe we'll do it. And also what I was going to say is the narration point you make, I only just realized now from you saying it that the other way they do a clever thing with that is they replace narration for Cable side with him telekinetically speaking to a reporter at the Daily Bugle,
which I liked because
it's an inventive new way to do it.
Yeah, and it was and you're absolutely right. I'm fully on board with you on that one because it does introduce an amount of exposition into it, but it gives us a really interesting insight quite early on into where Cable's powers are at.
Yeah,
because she sort of says there's a point where he calls her on the phone and she says, "Oh, no telekinetic communication now." And he says, yeah, no, I've been doing it all day. I'm tired. I've got a headache. And so it shows us the limits of his powers.
Yes.
And so it was expositional, but it was bringing in a character who then plot points centered around later in the story. And it was giving us a really great indication as to where Cable's powers were at and what the limitations of his powers were. And so again, this is a really great, you're right. This is a really great example of exposition being used to drive the story along.
Yeah. And it's a kind of amazing when you think about it. It's that it's a story written with smart and clever exposition, but at the same time, the story is kind of all over the place as well.
Oh, it's a hot mess, isn't it? The plot is all over the shop.
I think you can infer it. Like, if you're reading it, you can kind of get like, all right, this is the basic thing that's happened or that is happening. But as you're reading it, there's a lot of points where I was like, wait, who are these people? Like, there's a group of anarchists or something who steals the virus as well and just take it themselves. Like, and at no point is there any kind of explanation of like, oh, this is like super soldier serum and it gives us powers or whatever. They've just taken it. And there's never really explained why.
Yeah.
And that's if it's not the thing where like you have to have every single little thing explained. But when it's something like, we stole a thing from a lab and just put it in us.
So, but they were floating around a lot for the first issue, weren't they?
Yes.
Like they were quite prominent in the first issue. And so I agree with you. It's sort of like, why are they there?
I think their function was literally to melt. To take the virus and then show this is what happens.
Yeah, I suppose it does give us quite an early insight as to what the issue the protagonists are going to have to go overcome is.
Yes.
That wasn't a particularly well structured sentence, but you can have it.
I inferred the meaning.
Absolutely,
much like with this comic. But yeah, I think it's one of these stories where you might question it a bit, but there's enough there to follow it. And ultimately, it's just a bit of fun.
Yeah.
Like, the most I got from this comic was more like the character interactions, especially between Deadpool and Cable.
Yeah.
And everyone else kind of reacting around them.
Yes.
Like this leader of the blue man is like a weird kind of cult leader who's a bit funny as well. At one point, someone, I can't remember who specifically, but someone calls Cable G.I. Jesus.
Yes.
And I was like, that's a sick burn. And it wasn't even Deadpool, like, of all people. Like, that's little points like that, like details I thought were very good.
Did you notice the Superbad reference in this?
Possibly. I don't think I caught it. Which was it?
Well, so basically, Deadpool takes a stab at Cable, and he calls him like
Man of Steel?
No. He literally calls him Superman.
So there is a running theory that in Marvel and DC, each of them exists in each other's universe as comics, as superhero comics.
Right.
So in the Marvel universe, like Batman and Superman are fictional superheroes, and in DC universe, like Spider-Man and X-Men are fictional superheroes.
Right.
I don't know that's not a hard and fast rule. I don't think there's much evidence to
it was the only fourth wall break. And again, fourth wall breaks have become a staple of Deadpool content.
Way too much now. Yeah.
So there's a point where he's ripping his mask off in front of Cable, and he says, "Hey, if you looked like Ryan Reynolds crossed with a Sharpay, you'd understand."
This is that issue.
That's the line. And then he says, "Oh, what do you care? Superman with no kryptonite, Ajita."
Yep, there you go.
So again, it just struck me. I was like, "Oh, Marvel are name checking DC superheroes."
Yeah, it's hard to say with Deadpool because, again, as you say, because he's a fourth wall breaker in general. It's like...
But he's not really here yet, is he?
Not here specifically, but as a character by this point he was. So
right, okay.
In 97, he's a bit and it builds up, but it feels like a bit of an exception with him. Like it might not be like a kind of typical case because he is one of the few characters who knows he's in a comic. At one point, I think, like when he's killing the Marvel Universe, I think Charles Xavier tries to get in his mind. And because Xavier goes in his mind and discovers, oh shit, we're all comic book characters and we're not real, that makes him like brain dead because he can't handle that knowledge. Whereas Deadpool is insane and that's why he can live with that knowledge.
Yeah, he can survive with that.
So he's a bit of an outlier to be like, oh, they've done a big thing. It's like, well, it's Deadpool. Like that's all a constant rebuttal. It's like, well, it's Deadpool though.
And it's an interesting rumination because to a certain level, we are all fictional.
There's a quote from Pete Holmes, the comedian, who made a good point, which he was like, if God's the author of the story, the authors are never mentioned in the stories. So it's like in looking for proof of God in the world is like looking for proof of the author in the story.
I don't mean that we're strictly fictional. I mean that we are the sum total of the story that we continue to tell about ourselves, right? Like you are the sum total of all of the things that you think and know about yourself and your experiences. But really you are the way that somebody else perceives you and your actions, but internally you are a story that you tell yourself, right? And so like Deadpool, even though it's a funny fourth wally breaky thing and it's silly, he has hit on a fundamental truth of being human.
Yeah, I guess. And maybe that's why he's the most powerful character if you think about it.
Well, to a certain degree he is, isn't he? Because he doesn't care.
I mean, when he cares, he's a character who doesn't care, but then when he cares, it's a lot more impact.
Yeah, and have you noticed in this run, they used the same soft spot with Deadpool that they used in the 97 one?
Yeah.
So Cage explains his like...
Cage.
I'm thinking Cain and Abel. That's what I'm thinking. I've gone biblical.
Wow.
Cable is explaining the way that the virus that he has works. And he says like cancer.
Yeah, I literally was going to make
cancer?
that. Yeah.
And it's like, we're at the point with the character where they're still kind of hammering home that central character trait that he has, or that central sort of nerve that you can hit with Deadpool, which is that he's really sensitive to the big C.
Yeah, things that tie into his origin.
Yeah.
Because he's got one of the most traumatic origins.
Yeah, and I mean, it's somewhere between him, Wolverine, and Steve Rogers, isn't it?
Yeah.
In terms of, like, they were all experimented upon.
Yeah, but Steve Rogers was very much a step into the pod. Oh, you're ripped now. Like,
yeah, I suppose he was more of a willing participant, wasn't he?
He was like, for God and country and all that. I was going to say Queen, God and country. I was like, no, wrong country.
It's king and country now, mate.
Well, now that, but and then for God, country, and president.
Keir Starmer.
For Keir
Starmer.
You heard it here first or last. If
you've been under a rock for a while and you didn't know, we had an election and the fucking Labour Party won for the first time in my adult life.
Or you're American, and because who gives a shit about other elections? When like this election happened in France, you're like, yeah, all right, like whatever.
They just had elections. Yeah, they did just have elections in France, actually.
Yeah, it's all a bit wild. I know about
and a Liberal government got in.
They haven't got in yet.
Oh, they're on the way in, though.
It's like a
aren't
hung
they?
parliament kind of situation.
Well, yeah, no, they got a really slim majority, but not slim enough to dominate their parliament, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So yeah, the a good allegory between kind of Deadpool and Cable, maybe why they kind of connect more.
Yeah.
And again, maybe they're such fucked up people because of these experiences. And again, like you said, like, traumatic origin. Like most, even other superheroes have like, oh yeah, Batman saw his parents die. It's like, yes, very traumatic, but it's not being experimented on to the point of wishing you were dead. Like that's a whole nother thing.
To literally forming a toxic relationship with the personification of death.
Exactly, yeah. So, and we're not arguing whose trauma is more valid than who else. Like, we're not getting into that.
Because that's a very 2024 conversation that I do not want to get involved in.
I'm more traumatic than, whatever.
Traumatized.
That's the word. I think past the story, and again, the story is the whole...
I don't even really want to sit there and talk about the actual plot so much.
No.
Because it is such a hot mess.
Yeah, the only thing I was going to mention, I think that maybe this might be the last kind of point we make on the story, because again, the story's not that important, and that sounds like a criticism. I think this is just a different style of superhero comic.
Yeah,
it's not so much about we need to get the thing, the MacGuffin, and save the world.
Yes,
and win the girl and all that.
And I suppose it is like it's a story that's being told to that backdrop.
Yeah.
You know, they're constantly trying to rescue a MacGuffin, and there's a time frame within which they need to do a certain thing before somebody else does a certain thing that harms humanity. But yeah, I mean, I think the central thing that I found interesting about this story was that were those interactions between Wade and Cable.
Yes, exactly.
Or Deadpool and Cable, whatever you want to call them.
And when you call the story a hot mess, I think this is one of kind of exceptions where it is a criticism of the story if you're kind of looking at all aspects of the comic, but also it just feels like this is a hot mess story. Like, as in, like, the events that they are experiencing as characters is just a hot mess of stuff.
Yeah, I don't think... Can you remember when we talked about the comic with the fucking lorry?
Oh, Phantom Road.
Road. And it was a bad story that was well told.
Yes.
I don't think this is that kind of situation. I don't think it's a bad story. I think it's just a little bit sloppy around the edges.
Yes.
In terms of the fact that it skips between these quite big, isolated plot points that don't really have a particularly good through line going through them. But the story is serviceable, and it serves as a nice backdrop for us to get a good look at these two characters, which I suppose is what they were going for. If you're saying that these were relatively new characters that had runs that had ended, they weren't doing anything with them, and it's like, well, just go do something with Deadpool and Cable, right?
Yeah.
And they did something with these characters, and they, you know, in terms of, I mean, we're doing Deadpool month this month, and
it's
so in terms of
month,
in terms of the evolution of Deadpool, I think this is a really nice point to stop at.
Yes,
it's a really nice sort of, you know, it's a beauty spot along the way in terms of getting a good gaze at Deadpool's character and the way it evolved.
Yes, and especially this is his first. So now Deadpool teams with everyone because he is a popular character. He teams with everyone. There's Deadpool. We're doing some of that next week, but he's basically teamed with everyone, even people that he's not like connected to, like beyond like Wolverine or Captain America or Spider-Man or whoever. But this is the kind of first instance of like, how does he look compared to another character who's like nowhere near like him? And it is more of like he actually, as a contrast, he's a lot different like reading him than when he's just by himself. Deadpool by himself is it's a very like strong flavored kind of dish, you know? Whereas when it's a strong flavored ingredient, but when you have him with other stuff, then it like
it mellows into a nice soup.
Exactly. And I think that kind of builds upon where he is now, where he's teaming with everyone.
Yeah.
But this was the first instance of like, oh, look at that. It's weird when he's next to someone else.
It's like anchovies. I wouldn't necessarily want to sit and eat a tin of anchovies as a snack, but drop a couple into a tomato sauce and it adds a nice saltiness.
Yep. And Cable is a plain tomato sauce.
He is, isn't he? He's a tin of chopped tomatoes that you've not put any basil in yet.
People normally go with like chalk and cheese. No, but this is a different one because they go well together. So yes, this is different. But it's not like, they're so different, like salt and pepper.
I think that was a nice metaphor, Ryan. I'm quite proud of it.
And Deadpool is definitely anchovies because he looks weird and like he'd be sticky if you touched him.
Yeah.
The other point about the story, which I think to touch on very briefly, because you'll know what I mean once I get onto the subject of this, the concept in this of people trying to turn everyone in the world into the same color because
Yeah.
they think it'll make more peace.
Homogenizing the species.
Exactly. And like I said earlier, obviously that would never work because there's always going to be tribalism of any kind, right?
Yes.
But I think even beyond that, it's funny how this is just like it's the reason we're not properly getting into like whether that would solve the world problems or not is because I don't think that's anyone believes that in this story. It's not like a proper goal of anyone.
Did you know that in the 80s that was a feature of critical race theory?
I don't know anything. For my sins, I don't know enough about critical race theory.
So there was an overwhelming opinion that, to be honest with you, I think ended up being like a layman thing that filtered down from stuff that intellectuals and academics were saying at the time. Localized quite strongly to Britain. After mass migration into Britain, there was a sense that basically because we're such a small country, everybody would just like the people in Britain would genetically homogenize essentially over a few generations, and that there wouldn't be like distinct ethnicities in Britain because we'd all just be like one race again.
Yeah.
Fucking weird idea, man.
I do think on a long enough timescale, the human race as a whole, because of globalization, will eventually get to that point.
Don't know that it will.
I think, like, again, way in the future.
Well,
like,
no,
long
because there's certain countries that have quite
all right, there's always going to be those
unique
areas of
phenotypal
exception.
characteristics that are just so big that you'd never...
There's going to be those families that are slightly lighter color beige than everyone else, and they're the ones who are still talking about their ancestors going on the Mayflower to America or whatever. Like, there's always going to be those kind of people. But I think generally there is going to be some kind of like mass multi-ethnic thing. This is why I didn't want to get into this. This is
totally.
Well above our
I shouldn't have
grade.
brought this up.
I think in like 2,000 years, like that's I'm putting my pin in that. 2,000 years.
I don't think there'll still be people in 2,000 years, mate.
Well, that's the other thing as well. But yeah, the reason I just wanted to mention is I think it's a clever use of a very lofty concept.
Yeah.
But it is ultimately just a very surface level. People are like, well, what if we're trying to solve racism? And it's like, that's not why you're doing it.
It's not
like,
how it works.
The blue people just want everyone to be blue because they're the blue church, and then everyone will be following them. Deadpool wants to do it because he doesn't like how he looks. So if everyone looks the same, he's not an odd one out. And Cable's like, this is going to go really badly. And not just because people melt.
But I think it ends up playing out as a weird allegory for racism, doesn't it?
Yeah. I mean,
And
it's
like,
not even allegory. I think it's very explicitly mentioned, isn't it?
Yeah. Well, yeah, it is. And I just think it's a really flawed idea.
I will say as well, the story that happens after this, I had a look at like the later arcs because I've read this whole series like years and years ago, but having a refresh of what happens after this, I was surprised that the arc that happens after this, I thought happened way later.
Well, it's the X-Men stuff, isn't it?
Well, X-Men kind of come into it, and I did wonder like if you were going to be like, when I saw Cyclops, I was going to be like, is he going to call Nathan his son? And you were going to be like, wait, what? Like, but he doesn't even mention it.
No.
So, but it's interesting now, retroactively, that's his dad who's been like, yeah, Cable's being an absolute bastard again. Dad's got to sort it out. But the story after this, Cable kind of makes himself like a mutant Jesus. Like he becomes Omega level psychic, and he kind of deals with all the superpowers of the world, being like, right, we're going to sort everything out now. Like, none of this bollocks, we are going to say. And everyone's like, who gives you the right? And he's kind of like, fair point, but also I'm really fucking powerful mutant, so, kind of got to do what I got to say. And it becomes like a nuclear allegory.
Oh, interesting.
Even to the point where Nate's like, right, you're getting rid of all the nukes. And they're like, come on, like, we need those.
I mean, even though we've just talked about two quite wider issues that this comic's dealt with, it's not labouring those points.
No.
And that's something that I hasten to mention, because we have read stuff where, either one of us has come away with a really strong impression of something metaphorical. Generally me, because that's kind of more my wheelhouse and the way I read, isn't it?
Yeah.
But with this, I didn't get a strong sense of that.
No.
But it was just that one kind of subplot, because it's almost a subplot, isn't it?
Well, here's the thing. Like I said, that is the next kind of story arc, is that these big lofty things like sorting the world's problems. And then by contrast, you have Deadpool, who in thinking that arc is being recruited by the X-Men, because another great plot point, I think, for continuing their connection, because of the whole Cable and Deadpool melting Cable, technovirusing, and then they're merging to cure each other. Cable has a teleporter that he can use anywhere in the world, and he literally says body slide by one, and that takes him to a new place. but him and Deadpool now share DNA, so the teleport will merge them together into one person wherever they go to. So that keeps them connected.
Yeah.
So all the shit that he's trying to do now, like this secretive kind of shit where he's like got this plan that no one knows about and kind of getting a bit villainy, but he's like doing good stuff.
Yeah.
All the while he's like, can't use my bloody teleport because then Deadpool will know what I'm doing. And they're using Deadpool to try and stop me. Like he knows that. The X-Men are like, let's get Deadpool. And then the X-Men have this thing where they're like, oh, we've got to deal with Deadpool now. Like, he's the only one. Like, we have to. So
why didn't we read that run? That sounds great.
Well, again, it was so close to like the beginning. So the next one we're doing is the one I told you I was like my favorite version of Deadpool.
Yeah,
but
I'm gonna shit on it.
But we're doing the second volume in that because it's a crossover with Captain America and Wolverine.
Oh,
so it's
sick.
like, well, we have to. With this is kind of in line with Deadpool 3.
Do you know? I never would have thought this because it's not the kind of character I like, the kind of upstanding, stoic hero. But Cap is fast becoming a character that I get excited to see.
He's the best guy. Like,
yeah, it's just when you see Steve turn up in stuff. Like, do you know? It's the same feeling I have when a plumber called Steve turns up. It's just like I know things are about to get better.
I think like if you're interacting in general superhero stuff, like you're reading a comic, whatever. When Steve turns up, it's like you're at a work drinks and you don't really like him in there, but then the person you thought wasn't coming turns up and you're like, oh, thank God, Steve's
that
here.
one
like,
sound colleague.
Yeah, like, oh, Steve, what are you doing? And you're not even like, they might not even like you, but they're respectful. And they're like, hey, hi, nice to meet you. And you're like, oh, you're the best. Like, oh, that's Captain America. Yeah. But the reason I mention that is because the first story is the Dead President story, which I've mentioned to you.
Yeah.
That's my favorite mini arc.
Yeah.
But I thought we have to do the crossover one because it's Deadpool hanging out with Captain America and especially Wolverine.
Yeah.
But Deadpool and Wolverine coming out. So, as I said, the largest bits kind of covered. Got some little bits.
Do it.
I think replacing the old one, I say this is Ryan's little bits. Yeah, exactly.
Hey, I got a big head and a tiny mouth. Hey, little bits.
Great use of gregarious near the beginning.
Yes.
There. Thought you'd catch that and appreciate that.
I've been your gregarious co-host at times.
That was one of the first ones, I believe. Deadpool says, blow my mind, and then Cable does blow his mind. Literally. And he's one person he can do that to. He's like, he's fine. Reminded me of there's a great Deadpool Punisher comic where Punisher is stringing Deadpool along in some way because he needs him for his help or whatever, but Deadpool doesn't like to do whatever he's doing. He's against it, whatever reason. So Punisher keeps headshotting him, like executing him, and Deadpool's like temporarily dead. Yeah. And then he has a bag of Deadpool masks. He replaces the mask because it's got a gunshot in it. Yeah. Puts him in the van or whatever, takes him to the next mission. And as Deadpool's coming to, he's like, what are we doing? Punch's like, oh yeah, we're going to kill these guys. Deadpool's like, all right, cool, yeah. And then like once it's done, he's like, hang on, you shot me back. And like that just repeats over and over again. That was really a good cool one. The guy melting in bed, I think that was some good art for like how distressing a thing that was. Yeah. He was just slowly melting. Cable's like, you're going to die. Like,
and I really like it when he says, oh, I can take the pain away. And he's like, oh, you do that for me. And then he fucking strangles him.
Yeah, because he's like, that's how.
That's how I take the pain away, yeah.
That's the only way. The gun Liefeld XS, as like I said, is great. And then G.I. Jesus, which I mentioned earlier. So they came up naturally. And Cable, at the end, writes his own news story after he becomes Omega level. And he naturally just refers to himself as the savior mutant. Yeah. It's like, all right, Cable, like, come on. Like, that's another difference. Deadpool, very self-deprecating. Yeah. Cable, bit full of himself.
Self-aggrandizing.
And again, the reasons that other people don't like both of them, they're different reasons, but they have the same effect. Yeah. You don't want to hang out with the person who's just joking, like making self-deprecating jokes all the time. And by the same contrast, you don't hang out with the Cable guy who's like, I'm going to save the future. It's like, all right, shut up. Like,
yeah, just we're getting tacos, bro.
So yeah, that's Cable and Deadpool, I think.
Yeah, it was a fun one.
I would highly recommend if you're interested in Deadpool at all, this is absolutely a stop to make on the kind of going back through the ages. Yeah. That could be another video what Deadpool to read.
Oh, that's a good one.
That's a good one.
So thank you for listening.
Oh, I've got some comments as well.
Yeah, let's do comments. Can I read one?
I mean, I've got them both in front of me, so
let me do it. I'm a good orator.
All right, I'll read the first one. Actually, there's two from the same person. The Bandits Gospel 6461. I don't know if that's a real I don't know how YouTube names work because that's different to the main one. But he says, "Hello, mine dudes. I've noticed that you didn't drag Alan Moore into this. Everything okay?" That was last week. And yeah, we missed him, but we got him in this time,
That's
which is why I
really
mentioned
cool.
earlier. So yeah, if we ever don't mention Alan Moore, it's because we're both severely depressed for a week.
Yes.
That's the signal. That's how you know.
And then what's the other one? I'm quite offended by this comment.
This is from Really Good Morning, who is a previous commenter.
They said, good that you marked the accent part so you can skip forward.
Thank you. Appreciate the effort. I'm glad you appreciate my effort.
What was his name?
That was Really Good Morning.
Really Good Morning. Just listen to the podcast that we make. My observations are valid and interesting.
And also, the Bandits Gospel also asked if we can please do a comic called 100 Bullets, which is it's kind of a indie comic that's got a bit of a run while it was out, kind of bit known.
You left a nice comment, so for you, my guy.
We'll do 100 Bullets at some point. So
Yeah.
you'll see that in the feed at some point soon.
Cool.
So yeah, there we go.
Thank you so much for listening. I have something to plug. Is that okay?
I don't know if we've got time because I did my little bits and then we read the fan comments. No, I'm feeling generous.
You're feeling generous.
You can go on. You can do it.
I'm working on some new YouTube content. They're like bedtime
He's stealing
stories.
my video ideas.
I'm really not. No. Do you know what? Funnily enough, Ryan, you can keep your video ideas, my guy.
And I bloody will. Thank you.
We have very different taste in terms of our output. So I'm working on some new YouTube content. It will be live when this podcast episode goes live. I started a channel a few years ago doing like bedtime stories for grown-ups. So I do improvised retellings of stories from mythology. This one is going to be the story of Thor facing off against the Midgard serpent Jormungand.
And I'm guessing that's Thor Odinson specifically, not to be confused with any other Thor.
Well, it's Thor, but yeah.
Don't get me like that.
From the original Snorri Sturluson Prose Edda.
Don't give me that whole, like, it's pronounced chorizo. Like, just say chorizo.
It's chorizo and it's Thor, you bastard. So yeah, if you'd like to see that, if you don't get enough of us on the podcast, you can go to Myths for Sad Grown-Ups. That's my YouTube channel. And there'll be a video there for you to watch. So thank you so much for listening. If you want to leave us a comment, please do. We do read them out. If you want to leave us a review, be as rude as you like. Just make it 5 stars. Thank you so much for listening and goodbye.
Thank you. Goodbye.